So why don't you introduce yourself? You look like you're a different person today. Maybe not always dressed like this, but who are you today, and then who are you normally?
So today I guess you could say I am Retail Media Ken. Normally, I'm Jeffrey Bustos. I'm the Vice President of Measurement, Addressability, and Data at the IB, where for the last 2 years, I've been leading efforts on measurement, specifically around retail media. And we published a Retail Media Buyer's Guide a few months ago. And then right now we're finalizing the measurement guidelines that we partnered with the MRC that we hope to have finalized as a standard in January.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions, just like an informal Q&A, and you can give your great insights. So first, what are the top 3 to 5 biggest kind of top of mind questions brands have specific to retail media networks today?
Top of mind for brands are really, am I seeing the growth? I think brands, especially with the macro events going this year and as we look into next year, the biggest thing brands want to know is retail media driving top dollar growth for my brand? And I think we're going to see a lot of more of those questions. And I think we've seen a lot of progress from the retailers in enabling that. I would say the second one is ease of activation. How can you make your brands, their human capital cost of retail media is pretty significant within brands. And obviously platforms like Pacvue do make it significantly easier for brands to be able to toggle through different retailers, make those optimizations and look at that performance. Otherwise, it does become a very fragmented ecosystem. And I think third of all is, how do you go into retail media thinking about a holistic approach? How do you ensure that there is internal collaboration within the brand? And then also when you go into those JBP negotiations, have you talked and coordinated with your merchant and trade teams? I think is a huge thing that brands are starting to look at.
And kind of off that, the answer that you just gave, are you seeing people organizing differently, or how are they, if they are kind of the way that they're organized internally doesn't help that? How are they maybe changing how they're thinking about their org structures or?
Yeah. So, I think, one of the questions I was being asked a lot last year was where the dollar's coming from. And I think if you kind of take it a step further, when you're at a $45 billion industry that has exploded within pretty much the last 3 years, the impact of dollars coming from various departments means that there is probably not the right amount of communication and alignment internally. Brands right now are trying to figure out how they should be looking at their organizational mapping. There's not one structure that is right. It's more on how do you ensure that there is communications. We've seen some brands have a center of excellence. Other brands have specific people within each department that integrate with other departments to ensure that there's no silos. And I think the main objective is ensure there's communication internally, ensure that you're aligning on objectives that are consistent. And then when you are talking and planning with your retailer, making sure that you're looking at the full capability of retail media, which also includes obviously the trade aspect of it. Yeah, retail media is a relationship business, and I think it's important that we maintain kind of that top of mind as we develop the media aspect of it.
Okay, so next question is going to be the hottest topic that I hear, which is, what's your POV on the hot topic of incrementality?
We at the IB and the MRC, a lot of people have been talking about incrementality, and that's why within the measurement guidelines, we devoted a whole chapter into incrementality because we think it's an important metric. We also want to make sure that there is accountability and there's transparency and there's methodology in how incrementality is being measured, especially as you look at, various use of probabilistic, deterministic, and synthetic data and controls. It is important that there is more consistency in how that is. It's how do you balance, personalization and customization of each retailer with some level of standardization. And probably to be a little controversial, YouTube brand is not incrementality. It's a great metric, but just because something is difficult to measure doesn't mean you can just use another metric. And I think one of the main objectives that we had for the measurement guidelines was definitions matter, words matter, methodology matters. And, I think that, new to brand is a great metric, and it's a very important metric for your brand. And so is incrementality, so is category share, all these other metrics that brands are looking at, and having consistent methodology and definitions around them it's going to enable the growth of retail media.
Absolutely. There's no magical iROAS button, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the content that you're producing. So like you have a guidelines, it's kind of like the retail media Bible. Can you talk a little bit about what is the content brands should be reading this guideline and how can they get it?
So yeah, we published the retail media buyer's guide in July, and the objective there was to provide an overview on media planning, audience strategy, creative development, and then finally collaboration. Within the organizational mapping, it's thinking, how has the role of the agency changed? I think agencies probably are right now under significant more pressure. They're the ones that are trying to bring the pieces together across the various departments within a brand, and then working with the retailer and the marketing teams to make sure that there's that consistency in strategy. And then also within brands, like how do you ensure there's more communication? And then within retailers, how can you also ensure that there's more seamless communication on that? And then beyond that, IAB Europe also published the buyer's guide. So, we are a global organization. So that is also available. And then right now we are working on a LATAM guide that we hope to have out before the end of the year.
Awesome. And how do they get it? Like go to your website? Is it download?
Just IAB.com -retail media, and you can just get it there, and it's downloadable. And we'll also put a link below here so anyone can download it.
Since you mentioned creative as one of the chapters, right? What's your thought on the generative AI tools that people like Amazon and Google are creating for creative?
Yeah, I think that the tools for generative AI and creative are exciting, and there's also needs to be a certain level of scrutiny on it. So I think it's really exciting because you can be more personalized with the consumer. I think that AI there needs to be ensuring that there's not data bias within AI. And what I mean by that is, different parts of the US say soda, other parts of the US say pop. And I haven't seen any AI tool right now that is able to differentiate soda and pop based on regional semantic usage. It kind of just takes the most used word, and that is how the page is personalized. So I think within AI, we definitely have a long way more to go to ensure that there's not that data bias. So that, I think it'd be really cool if you're in a certain region that you do say pop, the product display page says pop, and in the other place says soda. And I think having that opportunity is going to make it much easier for brands and retailers to personalize that content and reduce the cost of content development within retail media.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we're in Q4, and I'm sure people are in the throes of budgeting for 2024. What's your advice as brands are thinking about retail media networks for next year? Is there a framework you've heard of that's interesting, or a way brands are thinking about it that may be different or the same for next year?
The way brands are thinking about retail media for next year is very different from the way they've been doing it for the last 3 years. If you look from a P&L perspective, the cost of retail media and the investment has increased significantly. So I think brands internally are under significant more pressure by their finance department to prove out growth. And that pressure is going to be reflected in how brands invest in retailers. I think next year, we'll still see the significant growth in retail media year over year that we're expecting of about 20 to 25%. But that growth will really emphasize on which retailers are actually providing incremental revenue growth for a brand. And brands are having those conversations. I think brands are being much more strategic. And, we've seen a significant positive changes in talent within brand and also within retailers. Retailers have really dove into the technology part of it that we probably did not see that many tech-focused folks within a retail environment 2 years ago.
Okay, last question. We'll wrap it up with, What's the IAB Retail Media Network Council? What do they do, and who should get involved and how?
So yeah, we are a group of, we'd say a group of retailers, brands, agencies, ad tech companies such as Pacvue that have come together to develop, best practices, guidelines, and standards to really make sure that we're moving and growing retail media in a sustainable and positive direction. So, if you're a retailer, if you're a brand, you're working within retail media, you should be involved. And as we look into next year, two big projects for us are creative specifications, and then also open RTB for retail media.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm sure you have big Halloween plans ahead. You have the costumes, so now it's time to
Yes.
candy. Thanks so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.